support. We acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of this land, and we pay respect to elders past, present and future who hold the memories, traditions, culture and hope of Tasmania's First Peoples. Libraries Tasmania also pays respect to the resilience and strength of the Tasmanian Aboriginal people and extends that respect to all First Australian peoples. Thanks. So Suzanne.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone. It's great that you've taken the time to come and learn a little bit about homelessness, and we've got just a couple of people sharing with us as well, which will be Don and also Kim, to talk about the services, but I'll introduce them later. Some of this has come about because Council has decided to put some energy and resources into dealing with the issue of homelessness and has put together an action plan just as a way to start our work in this area. You're welcome to take an action plan, but it looks a little bit like this in brief. And we're doing a few different things, and we've been embarked on a few different things starting last year. One of those things that we've been working on has been training for our staff in the area of homelessness. So Don has come along to talk to around 80 or so of our council staff to just help them understand more of the issue, and he'll be sharing his insights with all of you. Another thing that we're hoping to do is work closely and collaboratively with key service providers. And what we want to do is make sure that what we do doesn't duplicate what other people are doing. So work together and implement their activities and promote their activities. Hey, Kevin. We've also, one of the key things we've been working on is producing this info card, and I'll pass one around that you can have a little look at. So this is a local information card. Maybe you can take a look, pass it on. That can be handed out to people that might be sleeping rough and needing some extra support. The info card has some key services that they can go to, and also shows what kinds of things are available at those places. So that's local to Clarence, and other places, Hobart and I think Glenorchy might also have a card similar. But this is one specifically for Clarence and Clarence-based services. So if you know of people who might be sleeping rough or someone who's in need of that particular information, we're kind of holding on to those. We're not just handing them out because they are specifically for people who might be needing them and needing that extra support. We've also put together at this stage 100 packs, and a backpack is being provided to a number of services, including Salvation Army. So Don and some other Housing Connect and a few other places will be able to access these through council. A backpack, and just team members fill in the gaps if I don't get it right. But these include some clothing items, personal care items, a Metro card, a personalised little care card, I guess, the information cards, and just sanitary items, hygiene, personal hygiene items. So this, we hope, will be a really useful and practical way that we can respond, and hopefully a nice pack that can be provided for people's needs. We're also working within council. We've got to get our own processes together. So what happens if for example, our rangers or our parking inspectors come across someone who's homeless, our staff who are out and about, what do they do? And at this stage, we don't have clear ideas or clear understanding of the things that we can do as council. So we're developing our own policies and procedures about that. And also educating the community. So through things like this talk, through the event that we're doing on the lawns and our social media, just helping raise awareness, help people understand what is homelessness about, what are the practical ways we can support, what's behind people becoming homeless, what are the issues that we need to care about. So they are the parts of our action plan. We have produced an information sheet that you are welcome to take that includes some explainers, some contact information, and also some things that you can do. So please take one of these on your way out. So we've put that information together, and you're welcome to take that and share that. And also you can share all of the information that you hear about and help educate other people around you. That would be good. Have I missed anything, team?
No, I don't think so. I think just if you do want electronic copies of those, then let us know and we can send that out.
So I'd just like to acknowledge the work that Susie and Liz have been doing on the homelessness project. It's been great having them working on that.
And also the help that Lions has provided with helping us pack the packs and some of the items that they need to purchase as well. It's really, really helpful.
Yeah. It's really great, this working in collaboration, working in partnership, and that's what makes things happen. So thanks everyone for being involved. We'll talk later about the event, but after this there is an event for lunch to raise awareness on council lawns, and we'd love you to hang around and be part of that as well. But the first person to share with us today will be Kim, and the library here do an amazing array of services and provide lots of great things. And so just before Don speaks, we just wanted to hear about what the library provides. So thanks, Kim, for sharing with us.
Just take me a moment to set up, sorry. Okay, thank you all for coming along today. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Libraries Tasmania and Rosny Library and some of the things that we can offer to people who may be experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity in the Clarence area particularly. So Libraries Tasmania has almost 50 sites right around Tasmania. We're part of a large network. And while we are all similar, each of us actually responds to the needs of our own communities. So you might be able to go into all of our libraries and we will be the same, but we will also be quite different as well. While we don't actually provide social or community services as such, we do provide some services and opportunities that could be useful for anyone who might be experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. So our space and our people. So we like to think that's one of our real benefits here and bonuses here. It's a beautiful space. It's a warm space. We're open between 9:30 and 6 o'clock on weekdays, 9:30 to 7 on Fridays and 9:30 to 12:30 on Saturdays. So we welcome people to our comfortable couches. We have tables and chairs, little private nooks. We have study areas. We also have toilets. One of the big things that we are really popular for is we have access to charging. So you can come in and charge your phone, you can charge your devices. We also offer free Wi-Fi, and that's one of our most popular services. So we pride ourselves on a space that offers kind, respectful and positive interactions. So, and this is the first bridge to anything else that we can offer. So it can be in short supply for someone who might be going through some homelessness issues. So we treat everyone with respect and kindness, and we give equal access to our services. So you'll often come in and you might find people that, I've just come from Hobart, and Hobart Library has a lot more visible homelessness community, and you'll find people there that are sleeping on couches and in quiet corners. And we do have people that come in. We had a gentleman that came in pre-COVID every day for a year just to charge his device and to sit in a warm corner and watch his TV. So, and that's the kind of service that we can offer. It's a very warm, safe space. So, and our Wi-Fi runs from 6 a.m. until 9 p.m. too, so it's not 24-hour, but it does actually offer people, if they wanted to sit outside, they can actually have access to the internet. So library membership. Once upon a time we were all about books, no more. Now books and borrowing of items, while they're still core business, they just make up a small part of the services that we offer. So, of course, we love having people join the library, but it's not compulsory, not even necessary. So a huge range of our services are here for everyone, and you don't have to have a library card to access them. We talk to people who think that having no fixed address would be a barrier to having a library card. That's not the case. We can work around those kinds of issues. And in recent years, we've abolished things like fines and late fees. So there's now no financial barrier as well. Having a library card does open up a wider range of services, but you don't need to have a library card in order to use the services that we offer. Having a library card does have a benefit though, because there is so much that we can offer when the library space is closed. We have a massive online presence now where there are so many things that people can do outside of library opening hours. We do have charges for lost or damaged items, but it's also changed to a fair cost. So once upon a time it used to be if we paid $40 for an item in 1976, we still charged you $40 for that item in 2021. It's all changed now, so if it's been in our collection for a little while, we'll only charge you $5 for that item, so that's actually made it a little bit more equitable. And the other thing too is come and talk to staff, because there's always ways and means. So our services and our opportunities. So with or without a membership, we have access to IT help and digital drop-in sessions. We have a huge volunteer program here at the library. Our volunteers sit out here at our computers, and if you need help with accessing anything online, just pop in and one of our volunteers will give you a hand with that. We also have digital drop-in sessions for people that might be experiencing a problem with their device and they want to come in and get some one-on-one help with that. We offer basic computing sessions and things like how to browse the internet. They're usually held in small groups, but it's very targeted small group tuition. You can book a computer, or you can just turn up and use one. We do have printing and photocopying, which is handy if you want to print a resume or something like that. There is a small charge, but as I said, nothing's impossible. Talk to staff if that's an issue. We can help you find access to the services that you need. Our volunteers and staff have all been trained in some pretty intensive searching, so if you need assistance with anything, we're happy to sit down with you and help you find what you need. We have access to a huge collection of items in the library itself. You can browse and read while you're in the library, such as newspapers and magazines. We have online tutorials and learning about everything from Facebook to Google to family history. We also have access to some accredited training. So at the moment we have a TAFE Cert 1 in technology happening in the room next door. So that's happening once a week. So often we are running courses and things like that. But we also have general interest courses. So this month is Family History Month. So for people that would like to come and learn about how to search their family history, that's available as well. We also run children and youth services and programs, story time, rock and rhyme for families, school holiday programs for school kids that might want something to fill in their school holidays. And we're just starting with Clarence Council Youth Services, a creative kids art group on Wednesday afternoons. So with the library membership, that changes things slightly. So you can have physical borrowing of books, CDs, DVDs, magazines, audiobooks, including our statewide hold service. So yes, you're always welcome to come in and browse, but this means that you can take them out for 3 weeks and keep them at home. As I said, there's no fines anymore, so it doesn't matter if they're brought back late. We also have e-resources, which is one of the areas that have exploded in the last few years. So that gives you access to things like movies, music, audiobooks, e-books, e-magazines. You can learn a language online through our apps. You can access reference materials, and that can all be from your own device, from your own space. So you just, log in with your library card and off you go. So we also have access to apps such as Ancestry Online. So they're all things that you can do from your home or wherever you might be located at that time. We match up people who would like some support to learn reading, writing and math skills. So that's a volunteer program. Our volunteers are trained through TAFE, and we match them with people that would like some support in those areas, and they meet once a week for an hour or two and gain reading, writing and math skills or confidence in communicating. It can improve literacy skills for work. As a part of that program, we also offer opportunities to get your learner's licence. We have an English conversation group for people with a non-English speaking background. And we also have volunteer support to help fill in forms or access our online services, those kinds of things as well. We also do quite a bit of outreach in the Clarence area. So we have an outreach worker who is one of our staff members who takes our programs out to places like the Child and Family Centres or neighbourhood houses. So they might be running, at the moment, they're going to be running family history courses in one of the neighbourhood houses this month. But it's also about running rock and rhyme and story time. So it's about being able to offer the program and extend the breadth of our services in a place where people feel comfortable. So not everybody wants to come into Rosny, so this gives people the opportunity to access those services outside of our building. So we're no longer so place-based, we're actually spreading our services around the community. And that's pretty much me. So if anyone had any questions about any of our services, happy to answer those or catch up with me at the end. But you can always come. Yes?
How far does your Wi-Fi reach?
On a good day, yeah. We actually, it's a bit of a laugh around here because we can't actually access it in our tea room out the back, but it does actually stretch all out into the grassed area at the front here. So you can actually sit outside and, you know, we often go out there in lunch breaks and that and use the free Wi-Fi out the front side. And it is, based on our statistics, our most popular service that we offer statewide. So you can always come in and have a chat to our staff, and if there's anything there that interested you, we're happy to give you more information, or feel free to refer people to us if you know of anyone that would like some help in those areas. Right. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I'm amazed always at the breadth of services that are provided by the library, and hopefully you heard something else that you didn't know before about what's on and what's available here. So now I'd just like to introduce Don, because Don's our homelessness guru, really, working tirelessly with people sleeping rough, and has a wealth of experience and knowledge about it. So really pleased, Don, that you're here to share with us today. Thanks for coming. And yeah, over to you.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. I'm sure you came to see the library information session, and you always go through your mind to see if you've got any books still sitting at home that you haven't and mine will be back from about the 1970s, so I think I'm statute of limitations is probably expired by now. Feel free to chop in. I've been doing what you termed training sessions for the Clarence City Council for a little while now. Information sessions, I reckon, and it's more a sharing of information and trying to sort of explain and see what people's experiences about their experiences with homelessness are. So my name's Don McRae. I've worked with the Salvation Army now for a bit over 10 years in the housing and homelessness area. So I sit as their acting state manager for housing and homelessness at the moment. I've worked across the sector for probably about 30 years in all sorts of government, non-government services. Basically, the last 16 years I've been supporting people coming out of this prison over here and trying to integrate back into the community. So, Christine mentioned to me before that some people suggest they see people who are experiencing homelessness in the community and other people don't see them at all. If you walk some of the paths that we walk and some of the hours that we walk, you'll certainly spot people. I guess we tend to know a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness. We have one program that I manage is called Salvation Army Street to Home. So that's something we fund ourselves from our, we'll do a sleep out next week to raise money for that. And that puts one person on the street in the Greater Hobart area. So people like Liz give us a call or send us an email and say there's somebody sleeping rough. We generally respond to it. We work right through to the Derwent Valley, right down through to Huonville and everywhere in between. So I guess one of the things that we compile over a period of time, I'll get into some of the definitions of homelessness in a minute. One of the things that we compile, which gets fed up to a national narrative through the Capital City Council of Capital City Lord Mayors across the country get together, and their focus has been certainly homelessness and primary homelessness over the last couple of years. So what we do is we keep a register, what they call a by name list, of everybody that we know who's sleeping in rough. And I'll probably get to our definitions of homelessness at the moment. About 8% of the people who are, and from the last census, who are sleeping, who are experiencing homelessness are sleeping rough. So when I say sleeping rough, those are the people who are sleeping in cars, sleeping in tents, sleeping out in the open, sleeping in a number of different areas around here. And I'm loath to actually point out exactly where people are, but I will to a certain extent. Down in the car parks down here in Rosny, Kangaroo Bay, Gilston Bay Yacht Club, on the beaches around here, up on the back areas above Lindisfarne, in bushy areas just out off the outskirts, up the back here around the golf course. There are lots of little spots where people are actually sleeping rough, and you probably won't really see them. We spoke to a guy when we were looking for somebody else only a couple of weeks ago, to find out that he'd only passed away a couple of days after we actually saw him. That's the sad thing about people who are experiencing not only homelessness, but especially primary homelessness. We see people who are sleeping out in this sort of weather. And it's to be exposed to all the elements, but to be exposed to a number of other different things. You don't make old bones living in this sort of environment. That's the honest bottom truth of it all. The people who are really struggling in our lives will not be, and very often won't be getting the age pension because they don't live that long. I've got a guy that I just showed Christine a picture of a pigeon that's been befriended by a guy who's been sleeping out. In his own words, he'll tell you he's been sleeping out for 20 years. I've only known him for about 3 years, and he's been actually sleeping rough without any tent or anything like that. He befriended a pigeon. I mean, a lot of the other people around the community suggest that pigeons are probably the most favourable bird. I see you've got some beautiful birds out here in the community because they tend to be a bit annoying around the bins or where they're going to drop a deposit. He found one with a dislocated wing, and this bird hasn't left his side since. Despite the fact it's got all its mates there, it sleeps in his sleeping bag and sits on his shoulder or on his hat. Quite a remarkable story. But that guy, he's in the late 40s, and if you said that he was mid-70s, you wouldn't be surprised. And that's just a very, very hard life. So you have a smaller, under 10% of the people who are actually experiencing that street homelessness. Probably we've got a number of people who are sleeping in secondary and tertiary homelessness, which is a compilation of sleeping in shelters, sleeping in overcrowded conditions, sleeping in motel, short-term accommodation, sleeping in caravan parks, sleeping in boarding houses. And probably the biggest one that we struggle to capture as far as the census goes, and hopefully we'll get a better snapshot of this month, is the couch surfers. Now, the couch surfers are very highly reluctant to actually put their hands up and say, I'm sleeping at somebody's place on the couch. Because if you're in a community housing, you're allowed to have someone stay there for a couple of nights a week. Any more than that, and you start to put your lease in jeopardy with the person who's your landlord. Similarly, for private rentals, it gets a bit tricky. So people are very reluctant to actually say to Big Brother, I'm sleeping on a couch at such and such an address. So that tends to be our biggest cohort. We see a lot of people falling into or at risk of homelessness these days that we never used to see before. We used to have that quintessential, stereotypical picture of somebody who was homeless, and that was an old guy in a big trench coat with a brown paper bag and a bottle in it, sleeping on a park bench. I can probably think about 2 of those that I've seen in the last 10 years or so. The picture of homelessness these days extends right across the spectrum to people you would never expect would be experiencing homelessness. If you look at the increase in reporting of domestic violence, certainly since Rosie Batty was involved in the narrative, that a lot more people are coming out and actually exposing the fact that they are been victims of domestic violence. So if you can imagine the police get called to your place, all of a sudden there's been an altercation, somebody has to leave that home for that night. Sometimes it's the mother, and if there's children or pets involved, they have to go somewhere. Now, in a perfect world, they would be offered emergency accommodation in a shelter, but the shelters are usually turning away a couple hundred people each every month because they can't meet demand. The tenure in a shelter is 12 weeks, so after that 12 weeks, somebody's got to be exited so they can bring somebody else in. Those people are often leave in the middle of the night with virtually nothing, and we find them in all sorts of different places parked in their cars. Usually people will go to friends or family members if they can, but bereft of any of those sorts of opportunities, they will go and park in a safe postcode. We very commonly find those people actually sleeping in places like Long Beach and Sandy Bay, because there's 24 access to showers, 24 access to toilets, there's places to cook in year on, and it's a safe postcode. We see a number of people who get to a point where, I was just about to say, the people exposed to domestic violence or survivors of domestic violence will usually go back 8 to 10 times before they actually leave that environment. And the difficulty is the behaviour very often doesn't diminish, it often escalates to a point where it becomes untenable. And the reasons people return is because there's very few other alternatives for people. If you want to, a mum and a couple of kids, for instance, you can go to the Discovery Park over at Rosny or Moreton, and that'll cost you in and around $750 a week. Generally, affordability for somebody with a family tax benefit would be somewhere around $300 to $350 a week. So you can see that you actually either draw on your savings or approach service providers to be able to supplement your accommodation. Anything over 25% of your income is regarded as putting yourself into rental stress. So if you look at some people who are paying 80% of their income, especially on a fixed income, to actually provide a roof over their head, it makes it highly unaffordable. And you start thinking about, well, you won't put the heater on, or you don't eat, or if you do eat, you go to the food vans, or you'll supplement your income some other way. We have a number of people who are falling into homelessness just by the simple fact that their rent has gone up an extra X amount of dollars a week, and living on the cusp before they realise that it's unaffordable. And we're seeing our affordability of rents per income in Tasmania has been the highest in Australia for about the last 18 months, nearly coming up for 2 years. Our house prices are actually just surpassed Melbourne and are now just behind Sydney's, which average house prices in Tasmania, nobody would have ever said that. We were always a quarter of Melbourne and Sydney prices. It's a matter of supply and demand in that sort of sense. A lot of people will tell you that the housing crisis is not a housing crisis. If you have a portfolio of 50 or 100 houses, you are not in crisis, let me tell you, because you'll be getting top rents at the moment, and you'll be doing quite nicely with that investment. What we have a crisis in is affordable housing, and most people who are coming to us these days, we have another part of a program that I run that supports people who are at risk of homelessness or who are experiencing homelessness, and that's to try and identify the reasons why they've become homeless in the first place and try and find remedies and find options for those people to go into affordable housing. We're finding that nobody wants to look at a private rental anymore, because if you're on youth allowance, forget about it, because there's no properties in the entirety of Australia that are affordable for somebody on youth allowance, unless it's a supported community accommodation. For somebody on job seeker, you can afford $140 at a push, $150 a week in rent, and the Anchor Care snapshot that they do every April will not find you one place in Tasmania that's affordable. If you're on a disability support pension or there or thereabouts, that sort of income, you can afford roughly about $250 to $260 a week. again, try and find one on the private market. You will not find one. I think in April they suggested there was probably about 4 or 5 across the state, and there's only slightly more of that across the country. So our rents have gone up like this. Our fixed income, our Centrelink income, has stayed pretty much neutral. So we are finding people who come to us and say, look, I'm not even bothered looking at the private rental market because I know I just can't afford it. The other aspect of the supply and demand is it not only pushes the price up, but when you go to look at an open home, you could be looking along with another 60 to 80 people. I haven't been to a private rental open home for a very long time because none of our clients want to do it. But the last time I went was Midway Point. There would have been 60 to 70 people there. I felt like just getting there early, getting the open home sign and dropping into the nearest wheelie bin and trying to get some better chances for the lady I was supporting. So it becomes a very, very difficult situation. The government will suggest there's about 3,500 people on the register. It's not a waiting list, they call it a register. They've also said in their own words that there's probably about closer to 14,000, 15,000 people who are actually in need of community housing. So by the time you take all those people who are couch surfing or living in overcrowded accommodation or living in boarding houses, people live in boarding houses for a very long time. People who are living in Bethlehem House, for instance, they don't have a 12-week turnaround, so people can stay there as long as they want. For those people, it's very, very difficult to actually ever see themselves moving out of there and into the private market, even into the public market is very, very difficult. So we have underfunded, and we've over the years we built the Broadacres, we built the Clarendon Vales and the Gage Brooks, and further back the Rokeries and the Bridgewaters. And I think our social housing model has improved dramatically since we had the idea to build Broadacres like we did. We built a number of those, and not just here, but in Launceston, Devonport and Burnie as well, and basically provided a whole heap of subsidised housing for a number of people without thinking that we might need to actually provide some services in there to keep people housed, to make sure that people's concerns or needs were addressed appropriately. Our social housing today is a very much a better thought out process where we're actually providing almost a social work element into the housing market, where if there's concerns with your neighbours, you don't just go and burn them out. We actually talk about mediation. We talk about actually doing something to address the issues rather than let them just simmer away, and all of a sudden we've got some criminal activity happening in someone's house. We are also building properties, and not just in one particular area, building properties all throughout the community that are well designed, the passive solar. Very often they've got the 7-star rating when they're built, so easy to heat. They've got, some of them have got solar security, they've got all sorts of different things. We're looking at different methodologies. We've got the Wintering Ham Group, who've built some townhouses in CBD of Hobart, where it's a gated community. Somebody rings the doorbell outside the gated community, and you can see who that is on the screen, and you can decide whether to talk to them, let them in, or otherwise. Those sorts of places are designed so people 50 plus can age for the next 20, 30 years, whatever it takes, and be able to maintain a good environment and a good, healthy standard of living with the supports that are around it. So there are things coming on board since Jackie Lambie managed to have our housing debt wiped. We went from getting a $32 million cheque from the federal government, which we cut in half and sent $16 million back every year on repayments of our loan, which we weren't going to pay off until 2070 or something like that. So that's enabled us to have more expenditure, to be able to do more new builds. But we're still behind the eight ball. We're still trying to catch up. So those people who are slipping through the gaps are falling into a situation where things look a bit hopeless. I've got a guy that's living out in his car. He's been living in his car for just about coming up on 8 years. He's been actively looking, it has to be said, a smaller area, because that's where his support networks are. And he sees people moving into the streets where he's been sleeping in people's driveways in his car. He knows most of the people. And he's just bereft of hope, because every time a house will become vacant, he thinks, I'll go to the Minister's office and I'll say, here I am, I'm still on the waiting list, please let me in, only to be overtaken by somebody else whose consideration that their needs are greater. So we have a lot of people who come to us on a day-to-day basis. I walked out the door this morning to come over here and a guy said, when are you getting your house done? And I said, yeah, I don't know where I'm going to pluck that from, but we'll keep working on it together. And I think the expectation, if you don't live and work in and around this sector, you just feel that, look, if my rent gets a bit tough, I'm just going to go and get a house somewhere else. And those days are long gone. And if you don't read the newspapers or if you're not in touch with what the sector's like at the moment, you can make some pretty ordinary decisions. We had an older couple living just up the road here whose rent was going up $30 a week. They weren't happy about it because they thought it was going to push them into rental stress. So they refused to sign the lease. As it turned out, they moved across the street and down the street by about 7 or 8 doors and ended up paying $40 more than they would have been paying, plus all the removalist costs, plus all the upheaval of moving out of the property you'd been in for that long. And that was because they were probably not advised well enough about what it actually happens when you lose your property. And we are seeing, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a number of people refer to us who are in their 70s and their 80s and are finding the affordability. There are some places like, should I say, not an aged care facility, but somewhere that's a supportive environment for people who are still aging in the community, charging $450 a week for rent. So what that means is that people are using not only all of their pension, but chopping into their super and their savings to actually afford their rent. So they're going backwards and backwards and backwards to a point where the bank balance runs dry. And those people are not ready to move into aged care facilities, which there's a cost to get into up front for people who have funds. But it really leaves people with very, very few options. And we've had people who've come to shelters, who've come to even the safe space, who are in that age group. And that's pretty devastating. My parents aren't here anymore, but to have people of my parents' age experiencing homelessness is just something I would never ever conceived as a kid growing up. And yet that's what we're exposed to. We're seeing people sleep on the streets more than we ever used to. And I think one of the interesting things is we also never see them, but over the last couple of years we've seen more people begging on the streets, I guess. We've seen more people quite obviously sleeping on the streets. It was something that was only in the realms of Melbourne or Sydney, would we see people sleeping on cardboard to stay the night. We're seeing so many more people like that who are just stuck. If you want to go into Bethlehem House, it'll cost you 87% of your pay to stay there. So some people, and yes, Tony Abbott said this a while back, that it's a lifestyle choice. It's a lifestyle choice only because they're bereft of any other opportunities, but not everybody wants to spend 87% of their pay to live in a place like Beth House. The benefits of living in Beth House is you get 3 square meals a day, you get a roof over your head, you get access to case management, and your place on the register gets elevated to a higher priority listing. So the chances of you getting a place in Beth House will happen sooner than if you're sleeping in a tent, surprisingly enough. But that's what they look at, is to alleviate the pressure on the shelters. We've got to start taking people out of the shelters and moving them into permanent housing. but not everybody appreciates that. Not everybody really wants to give away their money. Built Bayview Lodge, again, that's a supported environment, that's for very long term. Some people consider it transitional, but Gary, who runs Bayview Lodge, tends to have that sort of environment where people move and they don't want to leave. So when they do leave, when there's a vacancy, it's usually because someone's gone out feet first. So, but they'll, again, there's 85% of your pay to actually live there. Bilton Lodge is a similar one. Mountain View is another similar one where it does lock you into a poverty trap if you want to spend that sort of money. If you're living in community housing, for instance, you'll be looking at 25% of your fixed income. So it makes a difference. So people will look at those opportunities as transitional. I guess I mentioned some of the reasons why people are experiencing homelessness. Domestic violence is certainly a big one, and it's certainly been a big change over the last 5 years. We've talked about inaffordability of the housing stock in the market at the moment, but we've also got a number of issues around drug and alcohol, mental ill health, those sorts of issues where we find people are really, really struggling. If you live on the street, one of the more difficult things to do is to pass your time. You know, it's great, and I know a number of people who come here or come to the library in either Glenorchy or Hobart to spend some time, and especially on a pretty gloomy, cold day, it's a place where you can charge your phone, you can catch up on your social media, read the newspaper, all those sorts of things. But it's a place where you can actually be warm and be safe. I think a lot of those people who are really struggling with issues around addiction and around mental health are very prevalent on the streets, because that's what it does to you. If you didn't have a mental illness before you became homeless, you will eventually, because people say to you, it's like sleeping with one eye open. We can all go home and lock the doors and lock out the world, and unless a disaster happens, we can actually wake up the next morning and everything's all right, everything's the same as it was the night before. But for those people who are sleeping on the street, you don't know what sort of dangers are out there, whether it's a heightened suspicion, or whether it's something to do with your mental ill health, or whether you need to be a little bit more alert about your environment. People tend to sleep with one eye open. So when we see people sort of on the couches here or sleeping during the day, we think, you know, get up, get yourself a job, get yourself a house, get off the drugs, stop drinking, and you might get somewhere. That's probably because they've been awake all night. The other reason we see people in the height of winter awake all night is because it's too cold to sleep, and if you lay down you freeze. So people walk the streets for the night. Last night, I wasn't out last night, but my two workers were out on the streets between 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock last night, and that's an opportunity for them to engage with people who are street sleeping. We work very closely with the Moreton Outreach Group, which is a GP service you might have seen on the news last night, doing outreach COVID injections. They provide a low barrier service where people can actually go in, no judgment. Somebody can go in and have a GP consult. They can get prescriptions for certain things. They can get a full checkup. Now, for a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness, you think about the most important things first. You think about security, you think about food, you dream about having that roof over your head. So getting mental health and primary health supports, and certainly COVID injections, is a real benefit for people, because they otherwise wouldn't get there. Trying to find a GP if you don't have one locked in already is really difficult, and trying to find one that bulk bills is even more of a challenge. So having that service on the street is a great opportunity for us to be able to support people. And I had a pathology slip in my car for about 8 to 10 weeks, and there was a guy sleeping rough. I would say to him, all we've got to do, we've got the slip, let's walk across the street and get some bloods done. And the doctors were pretty keen to get some bloods done, because he had quite a few potentially problematic ailments, which he ended up having. And it was always an excuse, look, no, not tonight, come and see me tomorrow. And we didn't harass him, but every time I mentioned to him, I say, come on, let me get you across there at one stage. So one night we had a pathologist come out, and a phlebotomist, so drawing the blood, and I went up and woke him up and said, the thing I've been hassling you about to get your bloods done? He said, look, you can tell them when they come to me, I'll get it done. I said, let me introduce you to our local vampire. He's coming to take your blood. And it worked, and the doctors couldn't believe that they'd been trying for 6 months to try and get some blood tests done. It's about developing the relationships that we do, and it's people who would not normally go through the Housing Connect front door, the 9 to 5 methodology, that are slipping through the gaps. People have either been mismanaged through service provision, because not everybody has a non-judgmental approach. Not everybody looks at these people and thinks, well, maybe they're victims of circumstance, maybe they've just done it all to themselves and it's their own fault if they got a job and stopped doing drugs and stopped doing alcohol. Maybe they'd fix themselves. The case is very, very different when you actually start delving into the sort of things that have led to people having mental health, ill health and addictions. You start to understand exactly why they end up where they do. They were often on a trajectory right from a very young age of experiencing all sorts of different trauma. I won't go into all the different things. But some people just want to numb that part of their life, and that's how a lot of people get involved in addictions. The person who uses it socially isn't usually the person who's going to end up with a massive addiction. It's the person who tries to find a way to numb the pain ends up with the addiction, because whatever they're using, whether it's illicit drugs or whether it's prescription drugs or whether it's alcohol, the necessity to use more and more and more to block out the pain just ever increases in a horrible spiral, which sees people lose control of their lives. It sees people who are effectively, managing their lives particularly well. It sees their relationships go down the gurgler. It sees their jobs go down the gurgler. I've got somebody that I know who's never been involved in any criminal activity, has never been involved in drugs before, has only earned $2 million a year business, and because of using drugs over a 2-year period, lost that business and has ended up in jail, where things won't get any better. And if we've seen some of the reports that have come out, certainly in the last couple of days, but over the last couple of months, we'll see that there's a place that's in our Clarence community here that is not actually helping the situation at all. It's actually sending people in for periods of incarceration where they become bitter and not better. And if we think that's out of sight, out of mind, those people, 99% of those people will get out one day. So if we don't use an opportunity to treat people entirely with respect, to provide opportunities for not only rehabilitation but for reintegration back into our community, then one of my colleagues suggested, do you want somebody to build your house or burgle your house? We have the opportunity to make things better as a result over here, but unfortunately we're sadly lacking. The difficulty is that we have 50% of the people who come out of that prison will exit into homelessness, and it should be no surprise to people that 50% of those people will return to that prison within 2 years. For the younger cohort, for the younger, especially younger men, we'll see 68% of those people will return to that prison within 1 year, 12 months. 68% of those people will go, 58% of those people will go back. And there used to be something when I first started working in the prisons about 16 years ago, there was something they used to call the drunk's lag. So you would find somebody who was, that quintessential person sleeping on the park bench, didn't want to do a tough winter in Hobart. They'd commit some sort of crime, or back in those days you could actually go to prison and pay off your fines. So X amount of days, work towards X amount of dollars, and you'd come out debt free. We would see people do that. But it was few and far between, and it slowly became an urban myth. over the last few years, because people are actually getting out and bereft of any hope of any of any housing or any supports, they're actively committing crimes to go back into prison. I had a guy came to me in the mid of COVID last year now. He had been in prison 4 times, and all 4 times it had been for driving unlicensed, under the influence, a couple of evade police, a couple of stolen cars. And he knew exactly how to get back into prison. He was just sick of camping. He was sleeping in the bushes, and he went out and stole a car, evaded police, no licence, under the influence, and he came to us the next day and he said, "What am I going to do? They bailed me. They bailed me back to homelessness." So his inclination to want to get 3 square meals and a roof over his head just didn't work. So what did he do? He went for a warm climate. He's now on the mainland somewhere, probably finding some service that might support him. Hopefully he is. But that's the sad thing about it. And look, we can pay $125,000 a year to keep one person in prison, but it's probably better if we actually provide some supportive accommodation for people when they actually get out, or to avoid them going into the prison in the first place, and then we wouldn't have to spend $500 million in building a new one in Westbury or wherever it's going to be built. So that's my little rant about the correlations of the criminal justice system. But it's right across the board that we have those issues of homelessness. We have the issues of substance abuse. We have the issues of mental health, tend to be dealt with by the police, and the police are just saying, "We are not experts in this area. What do you want us to do?" When somebody's sleeping out here, the councils have changed a bit of a focus about moving people on. There are still a few councils who say, "If you're sleeping rough, we'll send our people in, we'll move you on and get rid of you." I'm pleased to say that the Hobart and Clarence City Council are certainly leaders in this area by virtue of the fact that they're providing supportive information sessions to all their staff and even to the elected representatives. Same with Hobart, and that initiative isn't just to move people on, it's to actually make sure that people are offered alternatives. Do you know where you can get accommodation? Are you signed up with a housing register? Are you signed up with a service provider that can help you be directed in the right space? Do you know where to get showers? Do you know where fresh toilets are? Do you know all those sorts of services that are around where you can actually be supported? There are still a few councils who'll just move people on, and I won't name them. It's best I don't. But what their focus is somebody, a ratepayer or somebody in the community, will make a complaint about somebody sleeping rough. The council inspectors will come along and their council inspectors will come along and move them along. So they'll move from that park to this park, and then the next complaint, I'll move them to that park. And eventually, over a period of 6 months, they'll do the 360 degrees and be back exactly where they started. So nothing's really been accomplished. Through the work we've been doing with the councils down here, is that we have a very different attitude, and combined with the police, what are the police going to do? They can give somebody an order to move on. That lasts for about 24 hours. Sometimes, depending on the order, it can last for 4 hours. So that person can come back. So what the focus is to try and alleviate some of the problems, direct people into the areas where they can actually be provided with some support rather than just be nudged along. We try and work with a number of people to say, okay, if you're sleeping rough, and we've had some people who are problematic. If they're down on the beach at between Howrah Beach and Bellreef Beach, we had some people sleeping down there for a while. They came under the scrutiny of the Parks and Gardens people who weren't happy because there was lots of litter. So we go and talk to the people and say, hey, look, the council may well turn a blind eye and allow you to stay here for a prolonged period. But if you start disrespecting them by disrespecting your environment, then they get put into an untenable situation. This is their job, and you don't have to rely on them coming to clean up your mess. Keep it clean. And to the point where we've had people, sleeping at Cenotaph in Hobart, right under the, I can't remember the old veteran, the Alec Campbell, under the Alec Campbell tree. Didn't even know that's what it was called before, but apparently that's where these people have been sleeping for probably on and off for about 3 years now. And every Anzac Day they'd have to be moved along, or if there was an event, regatta day, they'd have to be moved on. They've always maintained that place, and as obvious as it is to most people, you walk up there for Anzac Day in the morning, you'd never even notice the tents. There's 3 tents under a tree. There's not a bit of rubbish, there's not a bit of mess, there's been no damage whatsoever, and the council are pretty happy to leave those people to themselves. Very much the same with the people sleeping on the domain, the people sleeping in the places around here, unless they come under the scrutiny of somebody because they feel they're being antisocial or causing mischief, or it's a bit scary for some people using the facilities. Most of the time the councils down here are just pretty good at it and just leave people to themselves. So the police often get called when it is at that point where somebody has to move along because there's been a problematic issue, or because there's been fighting, or there's been open drug use or open alcohol consumption. But it has to get to a pretty bad level. They'll intervene if somebody's mental ill health is such a point that they feel that they're either a risk to themselves or they're a risk to other members of the public. The difficulty is when the police come and deal with those sorts of things. We'll give an example that recently somebody was having what was attributed to be a psychotic episode where that person wasn't really in full control of their faculties. The police came and intervened. The person resisted arrest. They were searched, found to have a sharp weapon, so a hidden weapon, which is an offence. Very often people will have illicit substances on them, either medication that's not theirs or a non-prescription medication. So there's another offence. By the time you actually get to the hospital, they can sit there, and unless they're on an order, which means that they can't leave, people will wait around to see if they can get some support after an hour or 2 hours, depending on what their capacity to wait is. They will walk straight back out on the street. The difficulty they have in accessing a mental health service is that they've all of a sudden been encapsulated through the criminal justice system, where they've got upwards of 3 or 4 or 5 charges. By the time the magistrate's court rocks around, the difficulty with managing your day-to-day affairs and actually being able to remember in your diary to turn up to the magistrate's court, or not receiving the letter because you don't have any fixed address to get your mail. The magistrate and everybody's sitting in the court waiting for you to attend court, and you don't attend court, so there's a warrant out for your arrest for failure to appear at court. And this can happen 2 or 3 times. By the time you actually rack up a series of offences in this manner, you can go from having something which is quite a minor issue that was around your mental health to having criminal offences and getting a criminal conviction. The difficulty with a lot of the magistrates is that if you have no place to call home, so nowhere to be bailed to, then very often the magistrate will remand you in custody until such times as your case has been dealt with. So here we go from having a mental illness to having the criminal justice system via the police dealing with it. And the police do not want to do it, but they are forced into action by the capacity for other services not to actually come on board. We've all seen the ramping at the hospital. We know what that's like. And that thinks, oh well, there's a lot of people waiting around. But if you think about the next time you put your hand up and decide to have a heart attack, where are those ambulances going to be? They're going to be parked down the driveway of the hospital with somebody in them. It's not that quick to be able to discharge somebody out of that and come to an emergency call. We have blockages of getting people into, when we talk about drug and alcohol services. Some people at the end of the day want to put their hand up and say, look, I've got a window of opportunity. I'm just having a lucid moment today where the drugs and alcohol have destroyed my life. I want to do something about it. Great. Hold that thought, and over the next 10 to 16 weeks, we might be able to get you in to see somebody. We obviously know that mental health opportunity is only open for that short amount of time. So to be able to get people to access those services in a timely manner when they need to is very, very difficult. Some of our Salvos workers are now actually doing outreach and actually coming out to where people are. So they don't have to go through the whole rehab, detox, then rehab. A lot of the people who are experiencing homelessness won't get through that front door of detox anyway. If you take somebody who's experiencing homelessness, who's got chronic addictions, especially with alcohol, because it's probably one of the most dangerous to detox from, it's got to be medically assisted detox. They won't take them through detox and they won't take them through rehab if the only opportunity for them is to be discharged into homelessness. Because they say that the period of detox is followed by a period of retox, which can be much more dangerous than actually just drinking and staying on the sort of consumption rate that you were in the first place. Think about this if you have to have an operation, and I've got a guy that we've been working with for a number of years who's been sleeping in his car. He had to have some reasonably significant surgery. He's been on the waiting list. Every time it would crop up, they say, sorry, we can't do your surgery because you haven't got a fixed address. We can't take you in because your chances of receiving aftercare support once you're discharged from hospital and your chances of getting an infection as a result of sleeping rough are too much risk, so we won't do the operation in the first place. So he lied to them. He told them he had an address. He used somebody's address to say, I'm living here. He lied to them, got his operation done, which was causing him absolutely chronic pain. We're finding people who are stuck in the hospital system, either in the mental health services or just primary health, people who have had strokes, for instance. We've got a couple of people who have been, one's a bilateral amputee, one's a unilateral amputee, who haven't got anywhere to be discharged from hospital because they need a purpose-built property. Getting up the stairs is, like in their old house, is no longer an option. For those who are stuck in a holding pattern of mental health services, we can't get people in through the front door of mental health services because the step-down facilities like Mistral Place, Coringal, even Tolosa, Respite, Millbrook Rise, are all holding people who are waiting to get into community accommodation. And the difficulty with that is providing somebody with a key just doesn't work. For people who need that level of support, giving somebody a house invariably doesn't work. We've got a guy that we were over in Franklin Square one day in town. He popped his head out of the bushes. We'd sort of seen him spasmodically. His mental health would see him have periods where the police would actually mandate that with a medical officer that he was locked in hospital for a period of time while his treatment was supported. We left him that day, came back to work, and the house in Tasmania, right next door, said we've got a property for him. So back down to the park, we knew where he was. I say, okay, be here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we're going to pick you up, get you a property. We did, we came over, picked up the keys, and that night, which is a really fast turnaround for any housing provider, we had him in that place that night with the bare necessities to be able to have the power on, have somewhere to sleep. The difficulty is, without that management of his primary health conditions and his mental health conditions, that place would have fallen over immediately. The difficulty, we've known him for many years, so we've built up a good trusting relationship with that person, but it still takes us a minimum of one visit a week to make sure that we act as intermediaries with his medical service providers to take him his medication. We put him on the phone, he talks to them. Yes, it looks like we look at his medication, looks like he's been taking it. We've got no way of verifying that. He could be chucking it all in the bin, one tablet a day. But we're there to actually provide that linkage of support. So when other people can slowly come in, and NDIS, for instance, and mental health can slowly come in and start taking over the reins from us to be able to do that. If we just walked away and left him with the key on the day that he moved in there, he would be back on the streets again, and his tenure in that property would have just fallen over, and then he would have a debt. And that's the most difficult thing about going through this process, that if you get behind on your rent, you end up with a notification to vacate. You can end up with a big clean-up, remediate the damage, clean the place. You know, it could be up for $4,000 or $5,000. That provides you a debt, so the next time you come around to actually look at housing, you've got to address that debt before you can actually get on the register. We see that all the time with people getting picked up and put into prison on remand. We'll see people get picked up, so they haven't had time to notify anybody that they're not coming home tonight, or if they haven't got any family, the place gets left vacant. All of a sudden, the housing provider will find out that the rent's not coming in through for the fortnight. That'll be the first flag that's raised. Access to a phone to be able to ring those people, or even think about ringing the people and saying, I'm locked up, please look after my house. Sometimes if they know, they'll drop the rent back to about $5 a week so they can actually look at the first 3 months. But the way the courts are these days, if you're on remand, the chances of you getting your case dealt with and over and done with in under 12 months is unlikely. So that person could be sitting there for X amount of time, you've lost your house. So, you know, all that time you should have been paying rent, you weren't paying rent. We've got to send the builders, the cleaners, remedy the place, do the vacation maintenance, get it ready for somebody to move in next time. And there's an easy $5,000 minimum cost. So when you come out, you go in with a house, you come out home experiencing homeless with a debt. So there's all sorts of barriers to be put up. I've talked about a lot of negative things. There are a lot of positive things that are going on. Certainly, all the new builds, and certainly over the hills at Clarendon Vale and Rokeby, Mission Australia Housing are doing an awesome job out there with some of the new builds. Seneca Evolve Housing out in the Glenorchy Herdsman's Cove, Claremont, Gagebrook and Bridgewater are doing some awesome work. And again, they've got that social work activity that comes to support people in their properties. The Salvos are doing things on a smaller scale. We're looking at step-down properties, so people who are going into our shelter don't have to be exited after 12 weeks. We can have a step-down facility where people can be supported in that environment. We have an opportunity for people who are going through the Bridge Rehab program who can be supported through their Matrix program, which is a step down. It doesn't have to be centre based. So we look at having transitional accommodation for people to first of all access services and then be able to move through at a good pace to be able to make sure that the interventions in their life are successful. We have places like Mountain View who have got 30 odd places, 30 odd rooms in the old Balmoral Hotel out of Goodwood. They're providing good supportive accommodation models. We've had the Hobart Women's Shelter, and we've had Beth House gain the access to the pods, which are a shipping container basically, but done out of a really nice pod. If you had a shack somewhere and you banged one of those on your property, you'd be pretty happy with your asset. And people like the style of living. And probably most importantly, for those people who are experiencing street homelessness, we've got the safe spaces that have come on board. It was, I don't know, a couple of years ago, John Stubley and myself were doing a presentation up the road here, and we came out on a particularly bad night. It was snow down to a very low level. It was a pretty ordinary experience for people sleeping out in that. We said, this is big crap, let's do something about it. So together we came up with the idea. The Salvos had already road tested it down on one of those nights when it was snowed down to 400 metres and wild winds, and we got people out of the rain for a couple of nights. So it's not rocket science. It takes a lot of organising, but it's not rocket science to be able to treat people with respect and provide a bed and some food for them overnight. So those safe spaces were extended. We did the initial pilot with, in collaboration with Hobart City Mission, Now they run, and I think they just announced in the last couple of days that they're going to be moving it up in Davey Street into a full-time facility, which is great. We've got Salvo's run one in Burnie, so 24 hours, and Launceston City Mission one run in Launceston. So it can bring 20 people off the streets who would otherwise be not able to couch surf or not able to get into emergency accommodation or a shelter, not able to find any other option. And for those people, the option is either sleeping on the street or sleeping in the safe space. It's not the Ritz. You set up a bed every night, and whatever food gets donated. Our girls would have gone in there last night with a box of donuts like this from Circle of Life, and most people sort of put a smile on their face when you get one of those donuts, but beware if you're going to shop over there, because they've got a diabetic coma in every single one. Very, very high in sugar and very rich, not to my taste, but the people love them. And if you think it's again, it's the cohort of the guys who sleep down here in their tents or up behind the barn or wherever they're sleeping. It's not always that cohort. We've had a lady with her 5 kids been sleeping in there. She was in there for about 3 weeks. Just didn't have anywhere else to go. Couldn't go back to her home. There was no other opportunities. She managed to get housing during that 3 weeks and was able to successfully find a place for her and her 5 kids. And they're all little kids. I think the oldest was 12, 13. So that is the changing face of people. We've got people with kids that get excluded, obviously kids with dogs who get excluded because nobody will take dogs. You very rarely find a private renter who's happy for you to take a dog. And I've seen people with their dogs, there's no way they're going to give them up. Though sometimes the only thing that's between them and jumping off the bridge. So they never want to give those animals up. But there's 2 places, I think, City View, just down as you head onto the bridge, and Mornington Discovery Park are the only 2 places in the whole of the Greater Hobart that will actually take someone with a dog. And there's a cost associated with that. So that's always a barrier for people trying to access the shelters. With the safe space, we don't encourage people, but if somebody comes in with a dog, it's the same for everybody. If the dog's got the capacity to live in a quiet, happy enjoyment with everybody else there, great. If it's one that's going to be wanting to fight and is aggressive, that's probably not the right dog and the right mix for the site. I was asked the question before, why can we only take 20 people? The methodology we've seen before for 20 people to live in an environment that will be not too much bigger than this, probably another 50% bigger than this room. You're bringing a whole heap of people with all sorts of issues, and the issues I've described before about certainly mental ill health, addictions. Some people, have tendencies to be a little bit antisocial at different times of the pay schedule, and it doesn't always work. So you've got to try and balance the mix of trying to find a safe space for the entire population who'll come and stay overnight. The beauty of bringing those people off the streets is it enables us to actually provide access to service provision for them. So those people who are, who may not even have an active housing application in place, or may not have seen a GP for so long that they can't remember the last time or even who the person's name was. For any of those service provision opportunities to address their drug and alcohol usage, we can actually bring those services to bear wherever those people are. I coined a term that people who've been largely estranged from normal service provision were able to access those services from off the couch. And the way that the Hobart Safe Space was actually set up, that we had just fold-out beds for most people, but because there was about a dozen couches there, people were sleeping on the couches. And I remember some visitors coming in and saying, they're sleeping on the couches. I said, have you ever heard of couch surfing? That's what these people often do. So it's, more inclined to go and stay somewhere like that and sleep on the couch, more comfortable, put a couple of couches together. The difficulty we've had since the COVID restrictions relaxed, we did have 24-hour use of the facility that we were using from the Hobart City Council. Now that's only part of the day, so they're only for the night period in the day. Everybody has to decant and move everything of their working possessions. So we see lots of people shuffling around the place with woolies trolleys and stuff like that, keeping the worldly possessions together. Now that we've got somewhere that's 24 hour a day, there's not necessity for those people to be exposed onto the street and have somewhere to be for all of that time. So I can prattle on for the next couple of hours, but it's probably an opportunity to draw breath and ask anybody if they've got any questions.